I am being watched. Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest, Season 3, Episode 2. It's called Nothing to Hide. So spoilers for the episode. And for me, this one is a solid episode. I'll get that out of the way first. But like for me, the main takeaway from this episode is kind of thematically what it introduces in terms of like one of the main, I assume, villainous forces of the season are going to be, which is this idea of fighting against anything that takes or spies or takes information about people, right? The main plot of this episode is this guy named Wayne Kruger who runs a company which is a data collection company that sort of takes things from online social media, other things. I think one of the examples he gives in this episode is like the membership that people have at a certain like store, and uses all this and sells it to companies, governments, whatever, right? Which is a big thing in the modern world. This is very much based on real stuff. The entire main plot of this episode focuses around that and people wanting revenge because people have been able to use his services, like stalkers and things like that, have been able to use his websites to track down victims. And there's people in a class action lawsuit who lost the lawsuit, but have since started taking revenge. And there's a bit more to it than that. There's like a mastermind behind it, and like the people are sort of like acting on individual parts of the plan, but not the whole thing. There's one person wants revenge for having like sort of private photographs leaked out that embarrassed her and sort of like ruined her career, and she was part of a plan that involved leaking a sex tape of this bad guy, or this, I say bad guy, this CEO, to embarrass him at his party and show his wife that he had an affair, kind of thing. So it's like the revenge is kind of some way connected to what they went through because his company does what it does, right? It's like a direct correlation between them. But by the end of the episode, it kind of sets up that there's this sort of bigger group of people who are more of a villainous group that are going to be sticking around for, I assume, the whole season, if not at least part of it. And I think what's interesting about that is how much it's kind of the antithesis of Finch, but also the machine in a way. Like, I think one of my favorite little moments in this episode is a good 2/3 in or so, but it's after like someone actually makes an attempt on this guy's life, and they bring him back to one of the apartments they've got, and Shaw's there, Finch is there, Reese is there, and Finch is working on his laptop hacking into the guy's company to get some information about a potential perpetrator. And this guy Wayne comes over and starts looking over his shoulder at the laptop, and Finch just stops, looks up at him, and goes, "Do you mind?" And I really laughed at that because Finch has been such a character about privacy. This episode even reminds us of that by starting with Shaw following him the way that Reese did back in season 1, the way Reese would look for information on Finch and like try and follow him around. Finch has been followed by Shaw at the start of the episode and kind of ducks out of the way and sort of Batman's out of the scene. And Reese shows up and says, "Yeah, he does that. That's the thing he does." And, Finch is just kind of, I won't say passive aggressive, but he makes it clear on the phone call for Shaw to not do it, basically, that he's not pleased about it and that he knows she was doing it. It's a fun moment because it makes sense that Shaw has similar impulses as to what Reese did back at the start of the show, even though I would say that she has a bit more information than Reese maybe did when he was starting out. It still makes sense that she would still want more because she's like Reese. She wants to know more about who she's working with. So it made sense on its own as a fun little sort of, okay, this is her at this stage in their partnership that they were back in season 1. But it's actually a double purpose because it also reminds us all that the way Finch is, not that we'd have forgotten, but it puts it in your mind so you're thinking about it. So that later in the episode, when he's sitting at this laptop, and this guy whose entire business is to extract information and impede on their privacy, he looks over the shoulder at Finch, who's the most private guy in the world, and Finch just hits him back with, "Do you mind?" It's the perfect, funny little interaction that just sums up this like idealistic conflict between the two entities in the room. But at the end of the episode, when we find out that person behind all of this. And to be fair, for once, I actually didn't see the reveal coming. I did not expect there to be someone above the father. They kind of pin it all on this guy posing as a janitor, who actually is this really smart guy. But his daughter was killed by an ex-boyfriend who was abusive, which of course ties in somewhat to Reese's own past with his old love interest and how she met her end. So he can sympathize with this guy in some level, which is again a nice bit of like character history that feeds into what's going on. But he ends up not being the mastermind. He's just kind of also a pawn in the same way that all the other people who were sending in tapes or stealing money from this guy or all the various things that have been happening to him throughout the episode to kind of ruin his life. The idea being that his marriage is ruined by the sex tape, the idea that his financials are ruined, and then his reputation that his company's ruined, and his livelihood is kind of taken away from him because his past, where he had a DUI 10 years ago, comes up. It's basically like all of it's designed to be the most on-the-nose just desserts as it can possibly be for what he does. But it turns out one of the guys working for this company that he was trying to make a deal with is actually the one who's orchestrated all this. So it was a genuine surprise towards the end when he pulls out a gun and shoots Reese, who's fine because he's got a vest on, but also shoots this target, Wayne, and kills him. He actually executes him. So this makes a rare episode of Person of Interest where the team just fail, right? So you're selling this new villainous group quite effectively because they succeed in killing their target. Although he does admit, this guy admits that the plan was not to kill him initially, it was just to scare the shit out of him and ruin his life. Things have went sideways and whatever. So he kills him and walks out. And the final conversation of the episode is about what this guy's motives were and the fact that he represents a group of some kind. Because he says there are others. He says this was just meant to be a lesson, the first presumably of many. And it's this idea of fighting back against anyone spying on people. And, so obviously, yes, I've already pointed out the connection to Finch being a private person. But the other thing that is also pointed out in this episode, when this initially comes up, what this guy Wayne Kruger does for a living in the company he's built, Reese does kind of point out, wait, your machine kind of does this. Your machine gets all this information. Like, let's talk about that. And Finch points out the differences and makes it clear this is why he built the machine to be something that no one could access, and it's why the machine only gives the security social security numbers, and it's why like he made sure no one could ever access it. It's because of people like Wayne Kruger. So Finch has done it with a set of ideals, of course, but I think it's interesting that we have a group of people, of villains potentially, who would probably be on a sort of just ideological basis the most opposed to this machine existing. Like, they would hate the idea that this even exists, regardless of whatever arguments Finch could make, what the rest of the team could make. They will just hate that this thing exists, if they ever even learn it does exist. But even if they don't learn it exists, it is kind of very interesting just thematically to poke at that this entire group might be just anti, like, data collection effectively. I mean, it's a bit more deeper than that, obviously. That's painted a bit of a sort of simple statement, but you know what I mean. It feels like it goes entirely against what they believe to even have this in existence. So I think that for me, that was the big thing of this episode, is like, yeah, like this asshole character having all this stuff happen to him. And like, honestly, across the episode, it's like, well, there's not much reasons to really feel bad for him because he is kind of an asshole for the most part. He doesn't seem to care what's happened to the people who have been hurt by his company. He does show a little bit of remorse when the father, who's like trying to kill him towards the end, says, yeah, we asked you when the ex-boyfriend found her to take her information off the site, and the company refused. We asked the second time he found her, they refused, and it went on multiple times until eventually he killed her. And that does seem to like get a little bit of remorse out of him, where he's like, oh, I didn't know. But like, all the episode, he's not really accepting any culpability. He kind of just accepts it as a collateral damage, effectively. Like, yeah, some people will misuse the data that we collect, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it. We just have to deal with it. And Finch kind of argues him with that on a little bit as well, where he's like, no, you can. If you care more about the people you're supposedly serving instead of your profits, then you probably could do something to help protect them. So Yeah, I think all of this like idea of what it's setting up is really cool. So while it's obviously presented as a fairly standalone episode, other than the fact that we're kind of teasing a villainous entity that now is out there for the season, it is actually introducing a very thematic idea that we can think about going forward. And it makes sense to me that this is a sort of villain that we're going to have. Again, we don't really know who's behind it, if it's ever going to be like a singular leader who's going to be the face of this group, or if it is just going to be this idea of the like a group of a mass of people who all feel this way, which symbolically might even make more sense in this idea that there is no just big bad face that we can say, oh, that is the bad guy and that's the person we can rally against. No, it's more an idea that we're fighting against. And the idea isn't even necessarily entirely wrong, arguably. Right? Obviously what they did here is bad, right? There's no denying that, but the raw idea of what they believe in isn't necessarily outright wrong. There is some merit to it that, maybe Finch will have to reconcile with, especially since Finch kind of lives that way, where he's just smart enough to be able to hide who he is from everyone. Not everyone is thinking about it all the time until it bites them on the ass in some way they can't see coming. Whereas Finch has obviously been very proactive about it his entire life. So yeah, so I think that stuff's all very fascinating, and I think it's a really interesting set of things to sort of set up going forward. We continued the Shaw likes to eat joke, which I was kind of hoping they were going to do. They go to a party where it's where the sex tape kind of like comes up in the middle of like a marriage video, and Shaw is just chowing down on, was it oysters or something? I don't know what she was eating. It didn't sound like anything I would want, but she was going to town. And even this running joke as well, that she's like, hey, you can't expect me to shoot someone on an empty stomach, for Finch to just jump in and be like, I'd rather you didn't shoot anyone, Shaw. So I'm enjoying that dynamic. It's really kind of added a bit of space to the core team, which is fun. She's also frustrated that she's having to do the undercover work where she's just in the office pretending to be like an office worker. In fact, we get a tease of the janitor who turns out to be important later, because he goes to like empty the bin next to her, and she like snaps and grabs at his arm because she's like on alert for threats and whatnot. So yeah, I think the more interesting sort of serious moment with Shaw this episode is that about halfway through, the more we learn about this guy who they're kind of like protecting, this Wayne Kruger, at one point she kind of says, is this really worth all of our effort? Is this guy worth like this much trouble to protect? Maybe he kind of has it coming. And Finch hits back with her, we never considered that question when we chose to help you. And it almost feels like nothing Finch says or Reese says ever really phases her. Shaw's a very tough character. She's got she's got the walls up around her. It's just the type of person she is. But it felt like that kind of cuts through a little bit, where she has to kind of consider this idea that they could have just left her out to dry, and like they have this policy of, no, we protect everyone. It doesn't matter who they are. Again, coming back to this idea that it's ideological. It's not picking and choosing just depending on whether you agree with the person or like the person kind of thing. So, yeah, that was a nice little moment with Shaw, I think. Elsewhere, cast-wise, there's no Root this episode, although IMDb does have her listed as in the cast but credit only, which does kind of confirm that she is main cast this season, because that's what it tends to look like when they just miss an episode. We do get a little bit of Fusco. He's basically just looking up stuff for Carter this episode, and then is surprised to find that Beecher's like the crime report and like the case files all been sealed, so he can't access it. But that's pretty much it. Carter does get a whole subplot though. Carter has got a new partner. She's switched to the day shift, and to do so, she had to be a trainer to a rookie cop. FTO, she called it. I'm going to assume TO is training officer. I'm not sure what the F would be standing for, but someone can let me know in the comments if you happen to. But this young guy has HR spy written all over him, right? I could be wrong. Maybe they want me to think that, they've double bluffed me before. I could see it. I could see it happening. But this young guy, I don't trust him for a second. I think he is HR spy 101 who's here to spy on Carter. And it even shows that, everyone's, Quinn comes to meet Carter at Beecher's grave, and when she implies that she doesn't quite believe who the supposed killers are, he immediately calls and says, "We've got a problem." Now, obviously, this young guy who, let me get his name here because I don't know off the top of my head. Mike Lasky? Lasky, I guess we'll go with. He is already in the episode before that point, don't get me wrong, but I think he's a plant. I think he is there to keep an eye on Carter. The way that he kind of pops up behind her at one point when she's on the phone to, I think it was Fusco she was on the phone to, asking about investigating Beecher. If it wasn't that, it would have been maybe talking to Finch or someone, but he pops up right behind her like a little leech, try to find information. So I don't trust him. He makes a whole speech towards the end of the episode that she, either he respects her, he wanted to work under her, but she doesn't seem to want to train anyone. So if that's the case, you should, cut him loose. And she sort of says, "Okay, fine, I'll do this properly." Because the whole episode, she just keeps telling him to stay in the car, and she's not really, including him in the activities, right? But she does get one cool scene where she goes to talk to the woman behind the sex tape. And when she basically just reveals she knows a bunch of stuff, this woman just starts speaking. And I'll be honest, this woman's perspective now must be that the NYPD is so good at their job, because Carter comes over and is like, "Yeah, so yeah, you put this sex tape in front of this guy, and we know about your history and blah blah." And she starts asking her questions. And at the end of the conversation, Carter says, "And if you ever do anything like this again, the NYPD will know." And I feel like this woman had to believe that statement. I mean, they won't, but this woman, you can't blame her for thinking they will know what's going on, because this random, officers just came up and spit out all of her life story at her and got some information out of her. So, but yeah, I don't trust the young guy. I think Lasky is trouble waiting to happen, and we'll see where that goes. But yeah. Poor Finch gets hit in the back of the head with a vase this episode. So another reason not to like Mr. Krueger. You know what? I'm impressed I've not made a Freddy Krueger joke yet, because it's the first thing I think of when I hear the name Krueger. But hey, yeah. I mean, I think all of those little details along the way of the specific crimes. There's a set piece where Krueger is in an elevator and someone turns off the safety for the elevator, so he goes plummeting. He doesn't actually get that hurt from that, to be honest. It almost feels like it was just meant to scare him, and someone worked out this, going this fast from this height will be fine, I guess. But it is just kind of a scare for him. But it does kind of show that the team are kind of struggling to keep up with whatever's going to happen next. And maybe that's because, yeah, it's all coming from different people. One thing is this one woman, the elevator thing someone else. We also get to see the standoff later on where Reese is trying to talk to the father and sort of talks him down from killing him and says, "No, your daughter wouldn't want this, respect her memory," and is able to talk him down. All of that stuff is solid. It's entertaining. It's sort of typical person of interest, episode to episode story stuff at this point. Reese has got a few dry one-liners, particularly when the guy's car gets hijacked by a hacker, and it flips him over. Reese comes up to the car wreck, and this guy's Krueger's struggling to get out the side of the car, and Reese just pokes his head in and says, "Looks like you could use a lift." Stunning dry wit from Mr. Reese. But I mean, I think all of that stuff is entertaining, and then the real meat of the episode, though, is how it sets up these core themes, and the idea that there is this group of people who might be an antagonist over the course of the season. It might be that they're not super villainous. Obviously, we're still dealing with HR as well. That's still something that's going on. This is an interesting direction to take one of the villain elements in, because it does feel like it's sort of poking against the raw concept of the show in some ways, and maybe possibly suggesting that our main characters are not completely innocent by trusting this machine that's collecting information. There's on some level, maybe there's an argument to be had about how right or wrong the machine existing even is. Obviously, this is a very different conversation to the machine being alive and having the rights to live now that it's a sentient being, potentially. Those are very different discussions to be had, but they're both valid in the context of the show and what we can do and say about it. So there you go. That's my thoughts on this week's Person of Interest, and I'm looking forward to seeing where we go next time. So let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments. Of course, I couldn't keep making these reviews if it wasn't for all the support that I get on patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, or in some cases YouTube memberships. Some people are signed up there if that's more convenient. But there's more bonuses to get on Patreon, so I always promote that a little bit more. But any way you can support the channel and all the reviews is, you know, every method is fantastic. So thank you very much. Like, subscribe, all the usual stuff. All that helps too. Helps find a bigger audience. I will see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?